So we'll do a brief concluding roundtable. I'll say a few words, and if anyone would like to add a few things. But I would like to start with thanks, and thank all of you. I think you all did a hard work preparing lectures, coming over, and fighting nature, some of you, and listening so patiently to all the lectures. But I think as much as we worked hard, there's one person who really worked very, very hard and made everything possible, made the conference possible, made things as smooth as possible, efficient as possible. And I think all of you agree with me that we really have to give a very, very large thanks to Asher. Before saying my, just, a few random concluding thoughts, we would like, I think the lectures were excellent, and I learned a lot, and I think we have here a wonderful volume of collected articles connected to each other with an internal logic to them, so we plan to publish a book. We will be back. We have some ideas about where to print it, but we have still to discuss that. I don't think we'll give you two. I want it as it's still in your mind, so of course a few months, but we'll give a date, some instructions. I think we'll have it peer-reviewed because it's important for all of us. For me, I always like to receive feedback, and for some of the scholars who need that their publication will be peer-reviewed for the universities, so we'll do it properly, a proper peer-reviewed volume. And we'll be back to you about that. Now, I think, well, the lectures were fascinating, and I think one of the things that for me, it's no surprise to me, it's no surprise to you, but I think it always impresses me how much the Theosophical Society was influential, how much it was spread, the geographical, the width, and I think I think here, well, that's a matter that not us, only us are recognizing it, also the group of Marco and Sarah Turner, and I think rightfully there's growing interest in it. I think a big question that was addressed without raising it is why, how to explain this extreme influence, power of the Theosophical Society, and at least I would phrase things that came here. I would say that Theosophical Society fitted or expressed, if I would use the term of Frederick Jameson, the cultural logic of the fin de siècle of late 19th century and 20th century, and because of that it was so successful, and because of that there were all those similarities and contexts with related currents, cultural currents, not just esoteric currents, and I think there's much to say, more to say about it, but I think that is at least a major key to understanding a Theosophical Society as a key expression of what happened in the cultural realm at that period. I think another issue that came in many of the lectures, and in Marco's and Victoria's and Shinichi and Nirmal and all the lectures concerning the Kabbalah, the Jewish aspects of theosophy or perceptions of theosophy, was the importance or the connections between nationalism in those appropriations, cultural appropriations between nationalism and the Theosophical Society. I think the similarities were fascinating. I think also the differences. I think that before this conference, I thought a lot about those differences in a matter or on the line or scale of East, West, and sometimes Judaism in its ambivalent place in between, but I think there's more to that. I think that's true, definitely true. But I think periphery and center. I think the different location, and we saw it very nicely, I think, with the Victoria and Marco's discussion of Greece and Italy and their place, the place theosophy played there in the constructions of different nationalities. Also in Massimo's lecture about Canada. I think that a remark of Pat here was very, very important about America didn't have, the American theosophists didn't have that. And I said jokingly, well, that's, their universe, that's a universe, so they don't have. I think there's something there. I think that it is really, it's not just the American. I think we have the same non-national issue in the case of the English theosophist. And I think this is exactly, it's not that it's not a national issue, it is indeed the identification of the universalistic aspect of theosophy with American or Anglo-Saxon culture at the time. Of course, with the differences between Blavatsky and Olcott and the other leaders, but I think that really explains something about this national expression in the various locations, and less so in England and in the United States. I think another issue that came and was fascinating was the ways of appropriation. How, and it came with Carl and Olaf's lectures, and I think many other lectures, without addressing it explicitly, but I think that's a very interesting point, and I think more can be done and heard about it, but I think that's another issue that we saw in different lectures. The chronological issue, I think, was fascinating, with Pat starting in the first. We have to distinguish. It's not theosophical, as I said, it's not theosophical society. I think it's not just theosophical movement. It's theosophical movements, and a lot of change through the chronology. And I think, again, we saw it in today's lecture when we're speaking the later developments, starting with Pat already in the beginning. So I think this is a very interesting question to see the changes in the different theosophical movements. I think another point that I was aware, and it came again, I was aware, of course, the importance of the arts. Yeah, which came in many lectures, and of course that was the theme of the Amsterdam September conference. And again, I think this is something significant and interesting. It was interesting, the different contexts, again, with Victoria and Massimo's lecture. I think there were, of course, there's more to do. There's a lot more to do, and I think some of the areas that I would have liked to hear more, and of course some of them we wanted to include in our, but we couldn't. More geographical areas, more case studies. And of course, what was lacking here, and I'm sorry to that, but we tried, was India. Yeah, because India is so central here, and we had through Carl and Krishnamurti, but I think we needed more to hear about the place of theosophy in India, also with Shibboleth through Gandhi, but in his South African stage. So I think there's more to be there, and of course at other places. And Shinichi mentioned China as should be very interesting, in the Philippines and many other areas. And I think each case study tells a fascinating and significant story. I think we spoke about art less. We had a little for Evgeny about literature. Yeah, the connection between literature, and I think you prepared to work more about that, right? But I think there's a vast area here to include theater, by the way, also as a very important theme. So I think that's another direction that I hope research and some of us will take part in it. Another thing that I thought that could be addressed more and should is politics. Because we touch that through nationalism, but there's much more to it. And of course, here the cases are definitely Sri Lanka, and India is the most obvious. But I think we have it in other places. And I think it's not just, the matter of national politics, also socialist groups, feminist groups, other kind of political counterculture groups. And I think it would be just suggested for a topic about Theosophical Society and politics should be fascinating. And the last point that I think that again came in many of the lectures, but should be addressed more, and that is I started with how I'm impressed with the effect and place and the centrality of the Theosophical Society. Now I know that I assume that as you have the same experience, that when I tell many people about I'm dealing with the Theosophical Society, and they say, "Who? What you're talking about?" And not, also in the academia. Yeah, and I think here the interesting question is not only the impact, but also the fact that this impact is not known. People are not aware. Historians, I think, are not always aware of that. And here comes the question, of course, with Hanefraff's apt description of Western esotericism at large as rejected knowledge. And I think the process of rejection should be investigated. And again, we saw it I think, explicitly, the explicit rejection in the case of Sri Lanka that Dirmal mentioned yesterday, which was interesting. I think some of us, Andreas, Konstantin Gormistrov, I wrote about the rejection amongst Jewish scholars, the rejection of the Theosophical Society. But these are the explicit cases, which are easy to study, but I think the implicit rejection, how it was ignored and downplayed, I think that could be, again, a very interesting topic. So these are my thoughts, starting with the impact, concluding with the question of rejection and ignoring, and if anyone, I would be happy to hear if anyone has thoughts, ideas, things that he wanted to say and didn't have the opportunity. Now we have the time to come out with them. Yes.
Just a word about rejection. I think there is something like that going on for sure, but I also think that it has to do with something that belongs to the inner history of the Theosophical movement. I think that the social and cultural impact of the movement as a whole, with exceptions and so on, changes. And perhaps this is something that should be addressed by looking at the movement as a whole. Annie Besant, for instance, was lecturing in universities and was received also in places that perhaps we would not realize how important they were at the time, socially, culturally. Today, perhaps this is not something what we would expect from the Theosophical Society in general, people belonging to the Theosophical Society that would have such a visibility, perhaps on media or these kind of things. And this is not because they are rejected, but also because perhaps they close down a little bit. The average age has gone up of members of the Theosophical Society, but also of other groups. Things are different perhaps with anthroposophy, it's true. But yeah, I don't know if it's just rejection. Perhaps there is also something that has to do really with the changing history of the movement as a whole.
Yeah. Mark already said something I was considering about this rejection issue. Of course, the rejection was largely due to the fact that Theosophy was regarded as disreputable in many quarters because of three main scandals. The Hudson report about Blavatsky, the accusations against Leadbeater, and then the Krishnamurti incident. And for this very reason, for instance, there is in the field of art told the story about how Peggy Guggenheim suppressed all the theosophical connection of her father, and we had, that's in a way at MoMA is still going on. Even if they devoted an exhibition to Hilary Rebbe, who was a theosophist and a close associate of Solomon Guggenheim recently. But the censorship is still going on, because the idea is, if it comes out that this artist or thinker or poet is a theosophist, these scandals will be in a way associated with him. However, that's the second remark. There is also the possibility of an excess of reaction, and that there is no rejection but overemphasis on the role of theosophy in certain political or even artistic movements. Of course, as I said, I do agree that there have been some exaggeration about the role played by Theosophical Society in the making of abstract art, and perhaps even in the making of the Indian Congress Party. So we can exaggerate in both ways. And I think now the scandals are quite far away, so we can perhaps simply study things for what they are, rather than asking whether it's good or bad to associate somebody with theosophy. So the question is whether and how do you plan to continue this project and perhaps cover some areas which in a short seminar, well, particularly short for me, but in general, you couldn't completely include.
Anyone, we bring a round table, so if anyone, okay, we could do another round if someone, yes, please.
Andreas.
Again, thank you for this conference, and I wanted to thank you, and who thought on this idea to visit the village. I think that I learned a lot about anthroposophy from this visit. That many, and I read, I think, at last 5,000 pages of Steiner, but this visit was very important for me. And another thing that I learned from this conference, that in some places we can say that Theosophy was a safe route for modernism, for modernity. And places that are more conservative, or peoples, or part of societies that are more conservative, sometimes they need routes for modernity that seems more safe and more connected to their tradition than liberalism or democracy and ideas like that. And I think that in some cases it seems that people used Theosophy not only to replace an undated religion, but also to go ahead in the path of modernity. I think that it's also an issue that should be researched more.
Yeah, I can just follow here, because I think the attitude towards what the place of Theosophy and Anthroposophy and other related concepts within modernity, I would see it a bit different. It's extremely ambivalent, because on the one hand you have this strong rejection of positivist sciences of modernity in its form as it revealed itself in the 19th century, and on the other hand you have this alliance with avant-gardistic art and with the core of what is really modernity. And I think this is actually the tension of these, the anti-modernist and the modernist side would be very interesting to underline, and then to look what is exactly the role of, let's say, Kabbalah and other traditions within this inner European debate. So I think all these esoteric elements, they were used as a certain force in order to answer the question of modernity. In that I would follow you. So the rest, I totally agree with you, Sugri. I just would add a small detail. I think if you would add one case study that would be really interesting, I think it would be Prague. we didn't actually. You talked about Prague, but not about the Theosophist Prague, about Karl Weinfurter and Gustav Meyring and the foundation of the Theosophical Lodge. And this example is also interesting because Kabbalah plays a huge role, and B, literature is very involved in that process. So it could be a really interesting case study to add the Prague.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely.
Example.
Also the conflicts between different national traditions there,
Exactly.
and between East and West.
Exactly. So it's a lot of questions that you raised can be studied at the example of Prague. And the last point I want to make, I want to thank you, Boaz, and you, Yuli, for, and I think this is in the name of everybody. You thanked Asher, but we want to thank both of you for organizing this conference. And again, I see a little bit my role in an official sense, but it's also personal, it's not only official. But really, thanks a lot.